Hello everyone, Fred here. In this installment of TPP Dynamite, I'm going to be reviewing the James Patterson, Duane Swierczynski mystery thriller novel Lion and Lamb. First things first though, if you haven't already, let me encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I post film, book, and TV series reviews. I do opinion pieces on entertainment, news, and affairs. I'm also an author of adult and young adult mystery novels. To date, I've released 3 books: The Women in White, The Lethal List, and most recently, Textbook Murder. They're all on sale now, and there are purchase links in my video description below. With that in mind, and without further ado, welcome to my mildly spoilery review of James Patterson and Duane Swierczynski's mystery thriller novel Lion and Lamb. The city is in a state of shock over the fate of 2 hometown heroes, Eagles starting quarterback Archie Hughes and his even more famous wife, Grammy-winning singer Francine Hughes. One spouse is murdered, the other is suspect number 1. Even before the case hits the courtroom, it's the hottest ticket in town. For the defense, Cooper Lamb, private investigator to the stars. For the prosecution, Vina Lion, a sleuth so bright she's got to wear shades. Between them, they know every secret in Philadelphia. Together, they prove how 2 wrongs can make a right. They are Lion and Lamb. I did not like this book very much. It did have its great moments. Having lived in Philadelphia myself, I got quite a bit of warm nostalgia from reading this book's generally amazing depictions of landmarks and highlights and even downsides of that city. And the last fifth or so of this book particularly held my undivided interest because of the breakneck pace and the shock and awe approach to the myriad reveals of twists. Unfortunately, the bland to poor nature of just about every other part of the story, and honestly big parts of the last fifth itself, diluted the good parts of this book down until the whole thing turned out to aggregately be middling at the very best. I would argue that this book is not James Patterson's best work, but that would be an ironic statement because of the dirty little open secret that almost everyone in publishing knows by now, which is that almost none of James Patterson's work even is James Patterson's work these days. Given how he only takes an active role in authoring the books he co-writes with famous people like Dolly Parton or President Bill Clinton, how he only outlines his other books, acts as an executive producer regarding their stories, then has other people write them in exchange for a co-authorship credit and a whiff of the proceeds. So it's probably more accurate to say this book is not Duane Swierczynski's best work or James Patterson's best outline. First and foremost, and this is so ironic given James Patterson's marketing background, but this book's premise is total false advertising. The teaser on the cover and even various other promotional elements build this book with the gimmick that Cooper Lion and Vina Lamb are rival all-star investigators who hate each other but are forced to work together to solve a murder and catch the murderer. Which sounds cool enough, except that's not at all how this book plays out. In fact, Lion and Lamb are colleagues whose enmity is teasing at worst, who respect each other deeply, who always play straight with each other even when they work for opposing sides, and who just have differing approaches to doing their jobs and living their lives. This book is also not a very good PI story, mostly because its portrayal of PI work is embarrassingly reductive and because the book itself places very little focus on the investigative arts. Lion and Lamb get most of their leads by being fortunate enough to be in the right places at the right times, or from their stereotypically tech-savvy genie-like assistants who are able to hack into anything and uncover any hidden background information for delivery at plot-convenient times, or by being fortunate enough to meet a metric ton of lower-class hirelings at apartments or restaurants or other locations who are bribed or threatened or sweet-talked into allowing them access to crime scenes or witnesses or other spaces that they'd never otherwise be able to get. Said lower to middle class workers also almost always have taken illicit pictures of scandalous events involving witnesses or suspects who are caught red-handed in compromising positions, and they're willing to share those pictures with Lion, Lamb, and or their assistants. Also, right from the start, I questioned the legality of how Lion and Lamb share their information with each other so frequently and so easily. Lion is working for the DA's office in this case, and Lamb is working for the defense attorney. Most PIs in that sort of position would be forced to sign NDAs or some alternative agreements by which they could be prosecuted for leaking privileged information to the other side. So it just rang false to me that they'd have an arrangement by which they gave each other access to everything they learned, and it rang even falser how often both of them seemed to get away with doing that kind of thing just because they're both regarded as legends in the Philadelphia PI community. Neither Lion nor Lamb felt very well fleshed out or characterized to me in this book, and most of the characterization that they did get came courtesy of some truly awful dialogue that basically served to tell versus show the reader what we needed to know about each of them. Lamb is a stereotypical, handsome, roguish, action hero, bad boy, lady killer, and people person. Most of our glimpses into his more emotional side come from his relationship with his two preteen kids whom he shares with his ex-wife. The kids are, of course, way too intelligent for their ages, as tends to happen in this kind of story, and his daughter at least is maturer than he is. You could argue that living through their parents' divorce, however amicable it was, has aged the kids up to that effect, but still, their development is pretty unbelievable. Lamb also honestly lets his kids know way too much about his work as a private investigator. They know way too much privileged information even. Lion is a stereotypical, guarded, tactical, gorgeous ice queen type who nevertheless occasionally lets down her wall in some minor capacity to Lamb, with whom she shares a friendly rivalry and simmering sexual tension built up over years. It's also pretty heavily implied that despite how naturally guarded Lion is, she and Lamb casually flirt all the time. Most aspects of Lion and Lamb's personalities and histories are told to the reader versus shown, and they are told in very cringy and clunky bits of exposition. One example that comes to mind is this here. It's a scene early in the book in which Cooper Lamb is hired as a PI by a lawyer who essentially recounts his own resume to the readers so that they'll be aware of it. And there are dozens of other little examples like this. The times where we, the readers, are told how amazing Lion and Lamb are, or how they're the best investigators in Philadelphia, or how they have a rich history of friendly rivalry and sexual tension with each other, versus shown these things organically. Times where we're told how amazing Lion and Lamb's magical assistants are as an excuse for their magically finding evidence to move the story forward, but are not really shown the competence of those assistants. Times where we're told but not shown other important information about other major players in this story. There's just too much exposition in this book. The relationship between Lion and Lamb was so white bread and so stereotypical and so boring. It's pretty obvious on a surface level from this book's marketing, and even more obvious after reading maybe the first 100 pages of this book, that Lion and Lamb's relationship was written to basically emulate more successfully executed versions of the will they, won't they trope between bad boy, good girl investigator types, like Maddie and David in Moonlighting, or Bones and Booth in Bones, or Castle and Beckett in Castle, or Stephanie Plum and her two major love interests in the Stephanie Plum mystery series, or the list really just goes on, both on screen and on page, of better executions of this trope. In this particular book, Lion is into Lamb but doesn't want to commit because she's seen enough prior relationships to begin in love, end in tragic enmity, and she doesn't want to end up remembering Lamb in that way, as opposed to just remaining friends and maintaining their solid working relationship. Lamb is into Lion, but is far less of an overthinker than Lion. In chapter 33, Lion and Lamb share a drunken kiss. Then Lamb essentially attempts throughout the rest of the book to escalate their casual and flirty relationship into something more, only for Lion to gently rail against doing so. Later on, and for no reason, Lion basically drops her guard. She comes over to Lamb's home without warning and spends the night sleeping in Lamb's bed. At a later point, she fully commits and has sex with him, again with no real explanation as to why. Then they end the book as a happy couple. It all feels so empty and random, and there's almost zero build-up to it. And I'm not hating on the will they, won't they trope. It's been done to death, particularly in the mystery thriller genre, but when it's done properly, it's still beautiful to watch. But that's this book's problem. This book doesn't do it properly. This book boils the trope down to its most basic elements and essentially paints them in by the numbers. I never feel any of the emotion behind it. The elements are all there, of course, with hot leading characters with differing personalities. They're highly talented at doing the same job, but have very differing approaches. One is the people person and the other is the empirical loner. They respect each other's talent. They've got chemistry that usually the more empirical lone wolf tries to ignore until he or she can't anymore, which leads to their having a hot makeout session and sex. And those elements, that's generally what happens in these will they, won't they stories. Those are the basic elements. But this book's execution of that script only scratches the surface on how that kind of story should play out in an interesting way. Vina Lion and Cooper Lamb hardly felt like organically written friends or allies, much less love interests. And the shoehorning in of their relationship felt so trite that it was impossible for me to be truly invested in them as an in-game couple. This book's mystery was entirely unmemorable. An apparently good person is shockingly murdered. Another apparently good person gets blamed. There's dead bang evidence to imply the second good person's guilt. It turns out that both the victim and the alleged perpetrator were hiding scandalous secrets whose reveal ultimately means the solution to the case. Said solution involves an element of tragedy that requires the reader to embrace a sort of moral relativism to be satisfied with the ending. I could go on. Nothing that hasn't been done better a billion times before. Almost all aspects of the private investigation parts of this book were underwhelming. Lion and Lamb each employ a stereotypical, magical, tech-savvy assistant who's capable of sneaking into any place, hacking into anything, and uncovering any hidden knowledge that's capable of advancing the plot. Lion and Lamb are supposed to be the best PIs in Philadelphia, but it's their unbelievable assistants who feed them their best leads at plot-convenient story junctures. Also, I found myself very frustrated by how this book was interrupted every 3 or so chapters with cutaways to memos or transcripts or phone calls or reports made by Lion, Lamb, their assistants, or other law enforcement personnel. The interruptions really took me out of the story, and they often served as the writer's cheap outs to tell versus show major pieces of relevant information that develop the story. Lion and Lamb's stereotypical, magical assistants do most of the detective work in this book, and they do it off-page. Then the readers are told about it versus shown it in the form of memos or transcripts or notes from the assistants to their bosses about the evidence that they've found, usually by hacking into things. All told, it really just cheapened the ride for me. The solution to the overall mystery plot was shot full of holes that conveniently never exactly get answered. There are many infuriating loose ends that never quite get tied off. I could go on, but suffice it to say, this book's plot felt generally phoned in to me. So, brass tacks, this book is a largely forgettable, ill-conceived, exposition-laden, poorly structured PI novel that has some moments of greatness. It probably would have worked better if it had been retooled as an origin story on the relationship between Cooper Lion and Vina Lamb, one where readers got to watch their backstory and see how the epic relationship that we're told they have developed, that they already have rather, developed gracefully over time. This book likely also would have worked better if a more veteran author of PI novels wrote it, or at least collaborated with James Patterson on its story. So basically read this book if you're a slavishly devoted James Patterson fan, but everybody else just steer clear, it's not that good. I give James Patterson and Duane Swierczynski's Lion and Lamb 2.5 cronuts out of 5. At any rate, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Are your feelings more complex? Sound off in the comments below. Meanwhile, if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, click subscribe, ring that bell, and hey, follow me on social media as well. So long.